You think about them constantly, in the middle of the day, in the silence before sleep, in the space between breaths. It's not a choice. It's a pull, irrational, relentless, sacred in its ache. You've told yourself it's unhealthy. You've read the articles. You've whispered affirmations. You've tried to let go. And still, they live somewhere in you, like a ghost that doesn't know it's died. You wonder, what's wrong with me? Why does their name still make my stomach tighten? Why does a song, a scent, a street feel like a doorway you can't stop walking through? Here's a reframe your soul has been waiting to hear. This isn't madness. This isn't weakness. This is message. What you're calling obsession may not be about them at all. It might be your soul's whisper, its quiet cry for completion, not to return to them, but to return to the part of yourself they awakened. Carl Jung spoke of the complex, a cluster of psychic energy formed around an emotional event we couldn't fully process, a fragment of our psyche frozen in time. When someone touches that complex, they don't just attract us, they reactivate us. They become the face of our unfinished story. Bruce Lipton, a pioneer in cellular memory, reminds us that trauma and emotion are not just psychological, they're biological. Like software, they get stored in the subconscious, held in the nervous system. So maybe your thoughts aren't too much. Maybe they're the echoes of emotional memory trying to complete a sentence. Maybe your heart is circling not because you can't let go, but because something sacred inside you never got to land. What if you're not obsessed with them, but with the part of you that briefly came alive in their presence and then disappeared when they left? This isn't about how to stop feeling. This is about learning to listen to what the feeling has been trying to say. Because when obsession becomes a messenger, it's never about the person. It's about the portal they opened in your soul. And now, it's time to go in, not to erase them, but to finally retrieve you. It began in a moment you didn't realize would matter. A look, a sentence, a silence that lingered too long. You felt something stir in you, raw, ancient, almost mythic in its force. But the space wasn't safe enough for what was born. There was no closure, no real ending, no chance for what awakened in you to become fully lived. So instead, it fragmented. Part of you walked away, and part of you stayed, circling the scene, waiting for something that never arrived. You may believe this fixation is a flaw, that healing means silence, that forgetting is the goal, but this is not the soul's logic. In Jungian psychology, what is not integrated does not disappear. It returns, it loops, it haunts, not to punish you, but to remind you of what remains unfinished. A psychic complex, Jung said, is not a random emotional storm. It is the frozen echo of a sacred moment that the psyche could not digest. The person you're obsessing over may simply be the outer face of this internal fracture. You think the thoughts are the problem, but the psyche doesn't repeat what's resolved. It repeats what's still alive. So you find yourself remembering every word, fantasizing about what might have happened, feeling that strange mix of yearning and resentment. The story loops, not because you want it to, but because the soul still considers it open. And just like a song that gets stuck in your head, it's not because it's beautiful. It's because it never got to finish. You were emotionally activated, but not emotionally met. The moment asked you to rise, to feel, to open. But when the other person didn't meet you there, the experience became suspended. An unfinished chord in the nervous system, a half-written memory in the psyche. And now, obsession arrives as the soul's repetition, not to drag you backward, but to bring you back to the place where you left a part of yourself behind. Obsession then is not about lack, it's about longing for completion, not with them, but within. There was a version of you that came alive in their presence, not because they gave it to you, but because their gaze, their energy, their silence even, touched a forgotten layer inside you. It may have been sensuality, or a kind of softness you never knew how to embody. It may have been your voice, your wildness, your willingness to feel without armor. In those fleeting moments, something opened, and then, just as quickly, it was gone. Now you call it longing. You think it's for them, but what if it's for you? The part of you they awakened didn't vanish when they left. It simply receded, like a tide unsure if it was safe to return. We like to believe they brought out the best in me. But Jung would say, no one brings out anything that wasn't already waiting in the unconscious. They simply illuminated it. They stood near your soul's unopened door, and something inside you turned the handle. But when the person left, the light went with them, and the door closed. Now you stand beside it, remembering how it felt to be that alive, and mistaking the doorway for the one who stood near it. This is not addiction to a person. It's devotion to a feeling, a self-state that felt like truth, and even if they never meant to awaken it, they became the mirror, the sacred mirror, not because of who they are, but because of what they reflected. You're not trying to get them back. You're trying to find your way back to the part of yourself that felt real in their presence, that inner self that didn't perform, didn't shrink, didn't hide. Neville Goddard once said, "You attract what you are conscious of being." In their presence, you briefly became conscious of a larger self, one you may have never known you carried. So the longing is not madness, it's memory. Not of them, but of you. Like standing before a door that once opened in moonlight, and forgetting that the key was never in their hands, it was always in yours. You keep returning to the memory, to what was said and what wasn't, to the moment you looked at them and hoped they would stay, to the version of the story that only exists in your imagination, the one where they choose you, where the silence doesn't win. You think if you could go back and speak more clearly, love more gently, leave less quickly, it might have unfolded differently. You rehearse this private theater night after night, as if one perfect performance could rewrite the ending. But something deeper is happening. The relationship was never the destination. It was the stage. And your soul, ancient, unseen, luminous, was the real actor. Carl Jung often wrote that the external world reflects the inner world in symbolic form. Relationships, especially the ones that burn and then vanish, are rituals. They carry the shape of myth. They are less about the story and more about the archetype being summoned. This is why the obsession isn't with what happened. It's with what it meant, why it felt destined, why it still feels unfinished. Because beneath the surface, the relationship was mirroring something older, a forgotten narrative your soul was trying to remember. Something from childhood, something ancestral, something waiting to be witnessed and rewritten. But it ended too soon. The curtain closed before the character became whole. And now, the energy circles, not around the person, but around the archetype they embodied, the role they played in your inner mythology. The one who didn't stay, the one who saw you, the one who arrived as if on cue, then exited before the final act. This is why it lingers, because the play was never just about them. It was a sacred initiation, and it didn't reach completion. Like a rite interrupted mid-ceremony, your soul still waits for the final scene, not to change the outcome, but to embody what the story was trying to awaken in you all along. You think of them, and your chest contracts. You hear their name, and something in your stomach curls in on itself. You smell something faint, their cologne, a certain kind of rain, the way autumn used to arrive, and your body changes. Not subtly, not rationally, but like a wave you didn't see coming. This is not imagination, this is not weakness, this is memory, not of the mind, but of the body. Bruce Lipton reminds us that the subconscious is not simply a mental vault, it's biological. It's woven into your cells, your hormones, your breath. Trauma is not an idea, it's a frequency. And it lives where logic can't reach. When something intense happens emotionally, and the energy isn't processed, expressed, or completed, the body holds it. It doesn't ask questions, it simply stores. So when you find yourself reacting long after the story has ended, the sweating palms, the racing heart, the unexpected tears, it isn't because you haven't moved on. It's because part of you never moved through. Carl Jung spoke of the psyche as layered, conscious, unconscious, and deeper still, the body's instinctive knowing. And when the conscious mind refuses to feel, the unconscious hands it to the body, to hold, to carry, to echo. That's why forgetting doesn't work, why silence doesn't solve it. Your nervous system still leans toward the past, like a tree bending toward a sun it no longer sees, but whose warmth still lives in the grain of its bark. The roots remember. And this remembering is not an error. It is the soul's attempt to complete what was left undone, not with them, but with yourself. Because what the body holds, it holds for a reason, not to punish, but to preserve, to protect the sacred story that never got to close, and is now waiting quietly to be felt all the way through. They arrived, and something in you awakened. Not slowly, not politely, but like lightning striking a place you didn't know could burn. Suddenly there was clarity, desire, purpose, voice, the feeling that life had turned in your direction and that something sacred had been delivered in human form. And so, naturally, you clung to the delivery, to the body that carried the spark, to the face that seemed to carry meaning. But not all awakenings are meant to stay. Some are meant to shake the soul open, then disappear. Jung taught that we often project the deepest contents of the psyche onto those who stir us, not because they are gods, but because they stand at the fault lines of our unlived potential. We tell ourselves they were the sign, but signs are not destinations, they are signals pointing inward. What if the sacredness wasn't in them, but in what they revealed? What if they weren't the message, but the one who knocked? And the real message is still waiting to be opened inside you. You were never meant to chase the messenger. You were meant to read the letter, the one your own soul wrote in invisible ink and used them to deliver. This is the spiritual confusion that so often follows deep encounters. We confuse resonance with permanence. We confuse awakening with attachment. But what you felt with them was you, a part of you that was always there, hidden, hushed, waiting, and their presence acted like a mirror held up to the divine inside you. Joe Dispenza once described human experience as the triggering of inner potentials by external catalysts. The person wasn't the gift, they were the match. The gift was the fire, and the fire was yours. It is painful to realize you may never speak to them again, but even more painful to miss the deeper truth. You are not missing them. You are missing the version of yourself that was briefly illuminated in their light, like finding a letter that changed your life and forgetting that it wasn't the envelope that mattered. It was what was written inside, and that ink was always yours. Some connections don't end with silence, they end with echoes. You told yourself it was over, yet your dreams say otherwise. You try to be present, but a sentence they once said still floats beneath every conversation. You move forward, yet part of you still lingers at the threshold that never opened fully. It may have ended abruptly, or maybe it never truly began. Words left unsaid, feelings that rose and had nowhere to land. A door cracked open just wide enough to let your soul glimpse what might have been. Now the haunting is not of memory, but of incompletion. Jung understood this as interrupted initiation. When a meaningful emotional experience is cut short, the psyche doesn't file it away, it holds it, suspended, unmetabolized. The ritual began, but was never sealed. So your soul walks in circles, not because you're weak, but because the passage was never crossed. You tell yourself stories to fill in the gaps. Maybe he still thinks about me. Maybe if I had said one more thing, maybe it wasn't supposed to end. But beneath all these thoughts is a single unspoken truth. Your soul was interrupted mid-transformation. And what hurts isn't their absence, it's the unfinished becoming. You were in the middle of something ancient, something archetypal, something that asked you to feel more deeply, surrender more honestly, love more courageously. But life intervened, or they pulled away, or timing fractured what the heart was just beginning to hold. And now, even in their absence, the ritual continues inside you, in dreams, in sudden waves of emotion, in the parts of you that still feel half-born. It is not wrong to feel haunted. The haunting is the echo of something sacred that was meant to change you and didn't get the chance. Like a rite of passage left unfinished, your soul stands at the altar, still holding the offering. Not for them, but for the self you were becoming in their presence. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. The mind circles their memory like a flame, not because it wants to, but because it doesn't know where else to go. You think of their smile, their voice, the moment your hand almost reached theirs and didn't. But beneath that glow of fixation is something colder, something heavier, something ancient that your nervous system still knows how to avoid. Grief. Not just for them, but for the part of you that bloomed and was never held. For the life that almost happened. For the words that remained sacred only because they were never spoken. There is also shame. Not the loud kind, but the quiet, aching kind. The shame of being vulnerable in a world that didn't mirror it back. The shame of loving with open hands, only to find the space empty. And deeper still, the longing that has no name. Not for the person, but for the moment of recognition you felt in their presence. The moment that said, "Here I am, and here you are, and we are both more real now." Jung understood obsession not as pathology, but as cover, a defense, a container for something too vast, too holy, too unbearable to feel all at once. So the psyche builds a mask, and the mask is made of memories. We replay scenes, we analyze details, we hold on to fragments, because it's easier to stay near the flame than to admit we are cold. Bruce Lipton might remind us that the nervous system responds not just to danger, but to emotional fragmentation. It's not just protecting us from pain, it's protecting us from too much truth at once. So the obsession becomes a ritual of avoidance, not of the person, but of the wound that says you opened something inside you and then had to abandon it. And now you stand there, not in love, but in waiting. Not in madness, but in mourning, staring at the flame because it is easier than facing the dark. But the fire is not them. It never was. It is the grief that still glows in your chest. It is the longing that remains unanswered. It is the shame that still wants to be seen without having to explain itself. And when the obsession quiets, even for a breath, you may hear what it's been protecting all along. The unlived part of your heart. You've been told to move on, to forget, to let time sweep them from your heart, like a tide erasing footprints in the sand. But your soul doesn't work in straight lines. It doesn't care for timelines or tidy endings or the kind of closure that comes from silence. Because something real happened, something irreversible. A part of you was born in their presence, and it hasn't found a home since. The world calls this weakness, clinging, attachment, obsession. But what if it's not about clinging to the past? What if it's about honoring what was awakened in you and never fully lived? Jung spoke of individuation, the long inward path of becoming whole. And sometimes we don't find that path through joy. We find it through rupture, through the moment someone touches the part of us we'd buried so deeply we didn't know it still breathed. You thought you were being abandoned, but something was actually being delivered, not by them, but through them. They were not the destination, they were the door, and now the soul stands inside that threshold, not asking for return, but for integration, because real closure is not forgetting. It's not deleting memories or convincing the heart that it imagined what it felt. Real closure is a spiritual act. It happens when you turn inward and ask, what was born in me when they arrived? and what never had the chance to take root. Joe Dispenza reminds us, we become chemically addicted to emotions, not because we want the past, but because the nervous system is still holding on to the person who held the feeling. But that feeling is not gone. It's waiting for a new container, one that doesn't depend on their return. You were not meant to get over them. You were meant to grow through what they opened. Like a seed that sprouted under moonlight, not made for the sun, but no less sacred for blooming in silence. This love, even if unfinished, was never wasted. It carved a doorway. And now, the next chapter is not about forgetting, but about becoming the person you were always meant to be when your soul first recognized itself in their presence. You thought the obsession was failure, a sign that you hadn't healed, a reminder that your heart still wandered where it was no longer welcome. But perhaps it wasn't failure at all. Perhaps it was the soul's alarm, a whisper rising from the deep, calling you back to what was left undone inside. Not to return to them, not to make the story right, but to feel what you were never given time to feel. To grieve what was awakened but not held, to reclaim the part of you that was touched, seen, stirred, and then abandoned. Because obsession isn't about a person, it's about the emotional energy still waiting for release. The sacred event that didn't get to complete its cycle. And what if this is the invitation, not to get over it, but to make meaning from it, not to numb the feeling, but to follow it inward, like a thread leading back to the moment where you stopped trusting your own becoming. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And Bruce Lipton reminds us that the unconscious isn't just psychological, it's biological. Your body carries what your mind couldn't bear. Your nervous system becomes the altar of your unfinished stories. So perhaps this isn't a loop at all. Perhaps it's a soul wound, calling, crying, circling, not to punish, but to be heard, not to chase them, but to return to the place where you disappeared. And if you listen quietly, you may realize you were never meant to forget them. You were meant to remember you, the one who was born in their presence, the one who is still becoming, the one who now knows obsession was never madness. It was message, it was memory, it was meaning, waiting to be made whole, not out there, but here, within.